During the build-up to all this, Eddie had been talking to a bloke called Paul Simon.
I don't know if anybody's ever heard of him.
Who he then invited to come and play. And Paul Simon happened to be there with another guy who was born in Glasgow, who was actually a Geordie, who used to play a red guitar like that, which inspired me. And his name was Mark something? Mark Knopfler.
Was it Diarrhea? Chris Rea?
So the two of them were invited to come and play, and they turned up, and the bloke on the security guard, the security at the front of the nightclub, wouldn't let him in. So we had this opportunity to play with two real superstars.
I know.
And it passed us by.
Well, the thing was,
can you imagine?
Yeah, I mean, it sort of happened because we were just wind it back a minute. I mean, Annie Bradshaw came over to me and said, "Do you want to come and see Paul Simon's sound check?" Because in Adelaide, at the end of every Grand Prix, they'd always have a big act. I mean, one year it was Bon Jovi, and then it was Tina Turner, and whatever. Well, this time it was Paul Simon, and he just played to 1 million people in Central Park. That it was his Born at the Right Time tour, and he got a 29-piece band with him. So we were asked if we wanted to go and sound check with him, see his sound check, and we said yeah. So we were invited at the side of the stage. And this 29-piece band were just playing "You Can Call Me Al," which is like, it was incredible. And I was stood next to this little fella, who I immediately recognised as Harvey Goldsmith. And for those that don't know, Harvey Goldsmith was the promoter of Live Aid and everything else in between. And he said, "Have you met Paul yet?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Well, would you like to?" And I said, "When he comes off," he said, "I'll introduce you." So, of course, Paul Simon comes over and we chatted a little bit. And I said, he says, what are you doing? I said, well, I gave him one of those T-shirts, Pit Stop Boogie Boys. And I said, we're playing for the Marlborough party at the Hilton tomorrow. And he said, I'm staying at the Hilton. And I thought, well, I'm not going to let this one go. And I said, well, you're very welcome to come and join us.
You didn't put him on the guest list?
No. What it was, everybody was given a ticket to go to this party.
Paul Simon and Mark Knopfler.
Yeah, but he was given, everybody, this ticket this year was a banana. Right, it was a cardboard banana. If you didn't have a banana, you weren't getting in. Anyway, what Chris said was perfectly true. We got one of their Brazilian drummers in there, a guy called Ciro Baptista, and he was playing with us. Eddie got up on the drums. Me and Ron Dennis both got a pair of black Ray-Bans on. And we're singing Sweet Home Chicago like the bloody Blues Brothers. Now, you couldn't imagine that of Ron Dennis. Was he getting paid? I have no idea. But there were no mobile phones and everything then, but there were also no press involved, invited, because there were people with who they shouldn't be with and everything like that. But it was when I got to the airport the next day, and again it was Annie Bradshaw. She said, you had a great gig at the McLaren do, and I said, yeah. She said, well, it's a shame about Paul Simon. I said, well, I didn't expect him to turn up. She said, oh, don't you know? And I said, what do you mean? She says, well, he did turn up with Mark Knopfler and Michael Hutchence from In Excess. And they didn't have the right bloody banana. So they weren't allowed in. About 5 years ago, Paul Simon was on the Jules Holland show, and he did a song called Wristband. And the song goes, it's on YouTube and everything, if you haven't got a wristband, you're not coming in. And I just thought, I wonder if that was about us, But it was